I went to the grocery store not too long ago to buy some olives. My husband likes to make artisan pizza. We live in a rural town in Wisconsin, and there's no Grubhub and there's no takeout. And so if you want really good food, you make the really good food. And luckily, he's a great cook. So he said, I'm going to make some pizza. If you're going by a grocery store, pick up some olives. So I just was going to run in the grocery store and get the olives. And right before I go in, my phone rings, and it's my sister to talk to me about my niece's wedding. So I don't know if you've ever done this. You know, you're talking on the phone while going grocery shopping. Have you done that? That is like one of the strangest distractive experiences, I think. At least it is for me. And so I go through the store. I still talk to my sister. I drive home. I come in the house. I put the bag on the counter. My husband opens up the bag and looks in and says, "Where are the olives?" And I said, "What do you mean, where are the olives?" "They're in the bag. I went to the store." And he looks in the bag and he looks at me, and I go over and I look in. There are no olives. So what the heck is in that bag? An eggplant and crystallized ginger. Okay? And there were no olives. And I can't tell you why that was. I mean, I walked through the store and I bought those things. I'm not even sure why I bought them. I didn't have a particular menu in mind that involved eggplant and crystallized ginger. So how weird is it, right, that we don't even understand our own behavior? I think people are fascinating, and I think people are weird, and I think behavior is strange. And what I want to do right now is share with you some of the maybe more interesting things I think that are true about people. If you design products for people, I believe it really helps to try and understand what is this weird thing called a person. So let's take a look at the top 5 things I'm going to share with you. And some of you may know my book, which is 100 Things You Need to Know About People. So I don't have all 100. I just picked 5 that I want to talk about. So number 1, we are social animals. In fact, we need social connection so much that if we don't have it, we can literally die. I mean, physically, literally die. So there is a lot of research about something called failure to thrive syndrome. And this is the idea that without social connection, people can die. This research, some by 2010, some by 2008, babies who are in orphanages where they get food, they get medical care if they need it, but they don't get human connection. About a third of those babies will actually die, and of the 2/3 who don't die, 1/3 of those will have some kind of physical or emotional disability as they grow up. And it's not just true for babies. Humans need that kind of connection too. So this is recent research from 2016 that there is a correlation between some of our more chronic diseases and the amount of social connection that you have. So social connection is not just something that we like to do, we really, really need it. There's a chemical called oxytocin, which does a lot of things, but one of the things it does is it's the bonding chemical. So when you do something together with a group of people, especially something rhythmic, like chanting or dancing or drumming, that creates a social bond. And so what does this whole thing mean? It means that people will use whatever you have to be social. So if you're designing a product, even if you don't think of it as a social product, you might want to, because if there's even a slight way that they might use it in a social way, they will. It might not be intended on your part, but maybe it should be. So that's number 1. We are incredibly social creatures. We'll use any tool that's out there to connect with other people. Number 2. Your world doesn't exist as you think it does on many levels. And I want to start with visually. So actually, everything you see when the images come into your eye, they are upside down. There's actually this crazy goggles you can buy. You can buy not quite so fancy ones for $25 on the internet, and when you put them on, everything looks upside down. And in the research that's done on this, people actually, your brain does not reverse it, but people over time can come to function viewing things upside down as though it was right side up. There's some wonderful videos of people wearing these, and they're seeing everything upside down, and they can ride a bike, and they can write, and they can read, because our brains are very adaptable. But actually, your vision is upside down. And another thing about vision that we don't always realize is how important peripheral vision is. So central vision is what you see straight ahead. Peripheral vision is off to the side. And we now know that our peripheral vision, some research done that showed that when you have to identify the scene in front of you, you are actually using peripheral vision to identify where you are and where you think you should be. You can identify, for instance, in this study, what room someone, they showed them living rooms and dining rooms. You could identify the room more quickly and more accurately when it was viewed when all you could see was the peripheral vision rather than the central vision. We don't realize how important peripheral vision is for us. Think about websites. What's in the periphery of the page? Is it, for instance, something that has to do with the site, or is it, as often as we see it, blank space? You think your vision is clear, but actually only your central vision is clear. Your peripheral vision is actually fuzzy. So if you were, this is a previous version of the Boston transit map. If you were looking at where that circle is, this is what your peripheral vision would be seeing. It's not even clear, but it's very, very powerful. And when we design, by the way, visually, if we simplify, this is the new version of the Boston subway map, and it is a simpler design than the old one. And when it goes into that peripheral blurred vision, it's a little bit easier to understand because it is simple. This is why simple designs can be so powerful. Part of it is, if it's simple visually, our peripheral vision can see it better. Our peripheral vision, by the way, even directs us where to look and where to gaze. But it's not just our vision that isn't what we think it is. Our sense of sound is not necessarily what we think either. So your brain is really, we think of our senses, but it's really our brain that's interpreting the senses. This is an interesting piece of audio. So let's take a listen to what happens here.
That's been transformed by a computer to sound like gibberish. So, any idea what they said?
No.
Okay. We can hear it. So what you'll hear is a sentence.
Wait a minute. Can you guys hear that? Am I the only one that's hearing that? Is that coming out near on the? Nope. He says,
Tech is so easy to use.
I'm standing up here listening to it thinking, I can hear it. No? I can put my microphone next to it.
Sorry.
Now we have two people.
Dan. Where'd he go? Where did he go?
Why don't we have a totally wireless, cordless world yet? All right. Let's try it again.
Okay, now we'll hear the real sentence.
The Constitution Center is at the next stop.
Does it make sense that time?
Yeah, wait, was that the
It was
same?
the exact same sentence that you heard the first time.
No way.
It's the exact same sentence.
So when you hear something garbled like that, it doesn't make any sense until you hear it before. And then you can understand it. Because it's not really coming in through our hearing, it's really being worked on by our brain. And I hate to tell you, but another way your world is imaginary is that your memories don't really exist. So I think we all have an idea about memory. Do you remember this movie a couple years ago, Inside Out? And in this movie, if you didn't see it, or maybe you don't remember it, but they had all these colored balls, and each colored ball represented like a long-term memory of the main character. And there were these, vaults, vast vaults of all the colored balls that represented all of her memories. And of course, this is one of the curses of being a behavioral scientist, is you sit at the movies and go, that's not accurate. That is not, and the people next to you, you went with your friends, and they're like, shh, just watch the movie, And it's not accurate. And actually, interestingly, I heard the people who created the movie on the radio, and they said, well, actually, it's not quite accurate, but we decided to go ahead with it that way. We tend to think that our memories are stored as like little videos that play, but actually they're not. You recreate a memory every time you bring it up. Every time you think about a memory, it is actually recreated. This is why memory can be so fallible. It just does not work as the way it did in the movie. So what does it mean that our memories and our vision and our hearing doesn't work the way we think it does? It means that everybody's really having their own individual experience. So the challenge as a designer is you're designing hoping you can design an experience, but there is no such thing as an experience, because the experience you have is different from the experience you have and you have. They're all different experiences because our brains interpret them in totally different ways. Number 3, almost anything you think consciously doesn't really matter. As some of the other speakers have said, most of our mental processing is happening unconsciously. Estimates are perhaps as much as 90%. And we also know that we can see when you're going to make a decision. This research showed that the people watching what was going on in someone's brain through fMRI could see when a decision had been made and what decision had been made 7 to 10 seconds before the person making the decision was even aware of it. So we just aren't consciously aware of what's going on in here. Most of it happens unconsciously. And our last speaker talked about System 1 and System 2 thinking from Daniel Kahneman. And I'm not even going to explain it because he did such a great job explaining it. But we know, again, that most of the mental processing is System 1. Most of us are walking around in System 1 mode, not really thinking about things that hard. So if most thought is unconscious and most people are walking around in System 1 mode, it means that when you design, you have to really think about how are you going to design for the unconscious? How are you even going to test what people think? So if you have a product and you say, what do you think? Did you like it? Did you not like it? What was the experience like? They will tell you. But that's not necessarily what's really going on. And that's why the neural measurements that the doctor talked about are so important. So if we want to really understand how people are reacting. All right, I'm up to number 4. So I have a favorite superhero. And this superhero, let's see if you can identify with this. This is a superhero who can change their brain. This is a superhero who can swap their senses, so they can see with their tongue, maybe, or they can hear with their skin. This is a superhero who can come up with new brain structures, just create new things in their brain. And that superhero, you might have guessed, is you. So I want to talk a little bit about one of my favorite topics, which is neuroplasticity. A really fancy term that means that our brains can change. Years ago, we thought brains didn't change. We thought that after a certain point in your development, your brain was the way it was. That's why we used to joke around and don't drink too much, right? Because you're killing brain cells and you'll never get any more, and it's all downhill from here. But we now know that actually the brain changes over time. In fact, reading is something our brains create, the ability to read. We are not born with the capability of reading. We're born with the capability, for instance, to talk, even though we don't have language yet. We have that capability of language we're born with. But actually, we're not born able to read. Our brain actually has to steal resources from other parts in order to learn to read. So it's kind of an amazing thing. And when you think about it, reading is really recent. I mean, we started talking a long time ago, and then all the way over here, a few humans started reading, but those were very, very few. And in 1440, even more humans started reading, but even then, not everyone. So this is not something that was just normal, but our brains were able to adapt to that. There's a researcher, Mary Ann Wolf, and she's interested in how our brains are changing because of the changes in the kind of reading that we're doing. Because a lot of our reading now is blog posts and short articles, it's changing the way our brain is. Now, some people say this is a horrible thing. It'll be the end of the civilization as we know it. But Mary Ann Wolf talks about the fact that when people started to read in 1440, 1500, there were many people who said this is the end of civilization as we know it, and that wasn't true. So she's not that worried about it, but it is going to change our brain. Our brains do change. This is a device called the BrainPort, and it's developed to help people who have no sight be able to see. And what happens is you have those glasses, and there's a camera in the glasses, and the camera picks up a visual signal. The visual signal is transmitted to that little white thing, which you then put in your mouth. And the visual signal is changed into pulses that you feel on your tongue. And based on those pulses on the tongue, it goes into the brain. And interestingly, what happens is that part of that signal stays in the part of the brain that has to do with the tongue and taste. But within about 15 minutes, the brain says, this doesn't look like food to me, essentially. This looks like visual pattern. And the signal ends up, part of it, in the visual cortex. And people can see. Now, it's not really clear and seeing the way we think of seeing, but they can see. And blind people can read a letter, they can walk, they can go pick up a mug, they can climb a climbing wall, because they're able to see with their tongues. And I think this is amazing, but that's the neuroplasticity of the brain. The brain is capable of a lot more change than we think. We know that there's an enormous amount of work going on in brain-computer interfaces, and that our brain waves, actually, we can control things outside of ourselves just by thinking of them alone. I don't know if you've seen some of the videos, but people, for instance, who don't have limbs or can't move their limbs can type and move a mouse on the screen just by thinking of it, either wired with an implant or even not wired, just over Wi-Fi. This is an example. He's wearing a headset, and he can move that ball just by thinking about it. I talked recently to a man who's developed something he calls the encephalophone, where he puts on an EEG type headset and he creates music through a synthesizer just by thinking about it. It's kind of funny because he ends up sitting in a recliner on stage giving a concert. He has some backup musicians playing instruments, but he's just kind of sitting there like this, and he's making music with his brain. So what does it mean if our brains are neuroplastic, if we can do all of this? We assume that technology changes, but people, people are the same and evolution is very slow. But actually, we're changing also. Our brains are changing, our capabilities are changing. And so when you're going to design, you have to think about not only designing for who we are now, but who we might be in 5 years, 10 years, even from a neuroplasticity, brain changing perspective. All right, I got my last one, number 5. Brains are hackable. So we know, because this is the Habit Summit, that there are conditioned responses, and it's really easy for people to for habits to get created. We know that when the cell phone makes a noise, we reach for it without even thinking of it. We know that we can actually erase memories. We know that there are 3 ways, by the way. Remember the movie Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind? We can actually do this. There are 3 ways you can erase a memory. We can go in there and change people's brains. There are brain implants that people have that then there are signals that can be sent to calm them down, to prevent a PTSD rage from happening. DARPA is working on technologies. For instance, this is a stent rod. It's a little device. It's really, really small. So they don't even have to do brain surgery. It just gets sent up through an artery or a vein into the brain. And then there's 2-way communication, not one way, not just that we can send signals out and make things happen, but that people can send signals in and change what's going on in our brains. The goal is to have this 2-way communication. That scares me a little. I don't know if it scares you. I don't know if I trust other people to be in there hacking around in my brain. This is an example of controlling a roach with a smartphone. Do I want someone controlling my brain with a smartphone? We're getting to the point now where we can influence behavior, not only with design, but maybe with some of these new technologies. And so the final takeaways here, this is a summary of them all. But what I want you to think about is, what is your role as we design these potentially, especially the potentially hackable features? Do we want to do this? How far do we want to go with it? What's the role of the designer as we do this? Carl Sagan, one of my favorite scientists, it's far better to grasp the universe as it really is than to persist in delusion. I think we need to grasp humans as they really are and grasp the fact that they are evolving, and make sure that we know as much as we can about people, how they are now and how they are likely to be in the near future, so that we can design more intelligently and more ethically. Thank you.